everyone, and welcome to week 15. This week, we are also going to be talking about chapter 14, which covers violence, abuse, and harassment. This week's objectives include being able to explain the Violence Against Women Act, defining stalking, list ways to reduce rape, define sexual harassment, contrast sexual harassment and flirting, and finally, explain what to do if someone is being harassed. This week's assignments include the sexual harassment and flirting blog, the sexual harassment assignment in school, your chapter 14 quiz, and of course, your discussion board. The sexual harassment flirting blog, the purpose of it is to provide examples on the differences between harassment and flirting. To complete this assignment, you can use chapter 14 and also this PowerPoint to think about the differences between flirting and sexual harassment. Those two behaviors are very different. So for this blog, I want you to identify what are the differences between flirting and sexual harassment or harassment. Some questions to get you thinking are, what does harassment look like compared to what does flirting look like, what does harassment feel like, and what does flirting feel like? The next assignment is sexual harassment in school. And so for this, you're provided a real-life case study that highlights episodes of sexual harassment in college. What I'd like you to do is read the article, Sex in the Classroom, and after reading that linked article, answer the questions, which is under the what. As you can see here are the questions that you are to answer. So this brings us to our lecture for this week. The Violence Against Women's Act, which is also called VAWA, made crossing state lines to continue to abuse a partner or spouse a crime. It created much tougher penalties for sex offenders. It prohibited anyone facing a restraining order for domestic abuse from possessing a firearm. So if someone has filed a restraining order against someone else for domestic abuse, that person cannot legally own a firearm. It also provided substantial commitment of federal resources, such as money, for police and prevention service initiatives. It required sexual offenders to pay restitution to their victims. And then in addition, it also reauthorized in 2013 and also expanded to allow greater protection for Native Americans and lesbians. It also requires the states to pay for rape examinations. It provides funds for federal victim witness counselors. It extended the rape shield laws to protect crime victims. No abusive inquiries into a woman's private conduct is allowed. So for example, if a woman was raped, they can't, in the investigation, they can't ask her about her sexual background. And then it's required that released offenders report to local enforcement authorities. When we look at global issues and violence against women is present in every country and setting, but the amount of violence against women varies. Between 13% and 61% of women will have experienced partner violence at some point in their lives. And violence tends to be associated with rural settings, poverty, societies with regressive views about women, lower education, and growing up in a violent household. More than 80 countries found that 35% of women worldwide had experienced physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. When we look at sexual violence in healthcare center settings, sexual harassment by healthcare providers, genital mutilation, forced gynecological exams, and obligatory inspections of virginity. There's also child abuse and trafficking. Rape is often used as a weapon of war, and the examples below you may read on your own. And even these statistics and ideas about violence against women are horrifying. there is being progress that is being made in many of these areas. When we look at family and intimate violence, specifically stalking, excuse me, this is reported visual or physical proximity on 2 or more occasions, having non-consensual communication, which means you do not give consent for communication. If there are written, verbal, or implied threats, and then a combination of those that would cause fear in a reasonable person. In your book and also on this page, you can see the guidelines for women who are being stalked. When we look at family and intimate violence and stalking realities, it's estimated that almost 10% of women have been stalked by a partner at some point in their lifetime. 74% of people stalked by a former intimate partner reported there was violence or coercive control during the relationship. The first anti-stalking law was passed in California in 1990. And currently, what we see is cyber stalking is a factor in about 20 to 40% of all stalking cases reported. The next topic is child abuse and maltreatment. In 2013, I realize this is a little old, but over 500,000 US children reported as victims of abuse and neglect. Women represent 54% of all perpetrators. More than 1,500 children die per year from abuse and neglect. And the major types of maltreatment of children are physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and medical neglect. This brings us next to elder abuse. There are 3 major situations where abuse occurs: domestic abuse, at home, institutional abuse, so the person is at an institution, a nursing home, and self-neglect, they're not taking care of themselves. The 7 types of elder abuse include physical elder abuse, sexual elder abuse, emotional elder abuse, financial exploitation, neglect, self-neglect, and abandonment. Our next topic is about rape and sexual assault. In 2013, there were almost 200,000 reported victims of rape or sexual assault in the US. Date rape drugs, where Hypnol, GHB, GBL, Special K are used in many cases. 9 out of 10 victims of rape are female. Almost 80% of victims do know their assailants. About 42% of rape victims are under the age of 18. And marital rape only became a crime in all 50 states 20 years ago. So considering the history of the US, it is a relatively new crime. So how to reduce the risk of date rape? First, I just want to make sure that everyone understands it is not the victim's fault. It doesn't matter what the girl is wearing, how she's acting, not her fault. But there are ways to help keep yourself safer, or keep women safer, and these are just some ideas. So if a partner is being very dominant over you, be wary of that. Be wary when a date tries to control your behavior or pressures you in any other way. Be explicit with communication and say no. Avoid ambiguous messages with verbal and nonverbal behavior. Consider first dates in a group setting. Avoid remote or isolated spots, and limit alcohol or drug use. When we look at violence as it occurs from strangers, the common crimes that are increasing now are carjacking, robbery, murder, gang violence, and sexual assault and rape. In 2012, there were almost 300 violence and property hate crime victimizations during that year. Most of these hate crimes are motivated by race, but also religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and disability. Sexual harassment is an unwelcome sexual advance or request for sexual favors or other verbal and physical actions that are sexual in nature. The submission to this conduct is a term or condition of an individual's employment. So you go on a date with me or else you won't get that promotion, or you go on a date with me or else you're not going to be able to work here anymore. And it could be directly implied using those words or indirectly implied. A person's acceptance or rejection of the sexual conduct becomes used for employment decisions. So as I said, you go on a date with me or else I'm going to give the promotion to somebody else. The conduct unreasonably interferes with the person's work performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And these are overseen by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This is your blog for this week. I'm going to skip this for now, but these are just some questions to think about when comparing and contrasting flirting versus sexual harassment. So think about, what then is sexual harassment? How would you define sexual harassment? How is it different from flirting? Do you believe it's difficult or easy to tell the difference between sexual harassment and flirting? How do you know when that line has been crossed between flirting and a harassing behavior? And are the feelings of the person experiencing the harassment or flirting important? So sexual harassment is defined as unwanted conduct or communication of sexual nature that adversely affects a person's employment, opportunities, relationships, or environment. It is unwanted conduct or communication. That is the key, those are the key words for this definition. It is unlawful to harass a person because of that person's sex or gender. Harassment does not have to be sexual in nature, however, and can include offensive remarks about the person's sex. Although the law doesn't prohibit simple teasing, often offhanded comments or isolated incidents are not very serious. Harassment is illegal when it's so frequent or severe that it creates a hostile or offensive work environment, or when it involves or results in adverse employment decisions, such as the victim being fired or demoted or not getting that promotion. And the harasser can be anyone. It can be the victim's supervisor, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, or someone who's not an employee of the employer, such as a client or customer. Unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of sexual nature constitute sexual harassment. And whether it's explicitly or implicitly affects a person's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And it can occur in a variety of circumstances, but it's not limited to the following. The victim, as well as the harasser, may be man or woman. The victim does not have to be the opposite sex. The harasser can be the victim's supervisor, an agent of the employer, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, or a non-employee. The victim does not have to be the person harassed, but it could be anyone affected by the offensive conduct. So even witnessing harassment could be considered harassment. Unlawful sexual harassment may occur without economic injury to or discharge of the victim, and the harasser's conduct must be unwelcome. It is helpful for the victim to inform the harasser directly that the conduct is unwelcome and must stop, and then the victim should use any employer complaint mechanism or process or grievance system available to file on that complaint. And so again, it's very important that the person tells the harasser that this is unwelcome and to stop. So oftentimes people ask, well, who decides if it's sexual harassment? The person getting the attention always gets to decide because it is unwelcome and it's how they feel about it. So there are two types of sexual harassment in the workplace. There is hostile work environment. This is caused by repeated actions, comments, or objects that create intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And it does not have to be repeated to be considered sexual harassment if it is a severe incident. And then here are just some examples. 3 ways harassment is carried out is visual, physical, and verbal. So what to do if you are being sexually harassed? Keep a record of all the discriminatory practices you believe are taking place. Keep a record of the time, the date, the situation, and then just jot down what happened. Check your company's employee handbook. Your company may have their own equal opportunity officer, another way to file an internal complaint. Keep doing your job, keep doing a good job, and keep a record of your work. Keep copies, if you have them, at home of all your job evaluations, any letters or memos that show that you do good work. You can contact the EEOC, which is, again, the Equal Employment Opportunity Officer, to speak with a counselor about your legal rights and whether you choose to file a claim or not. And that person may investigate and or offer mediation services to help resolve the complaint. However, keep in mind that in most cases, you have 180 days, which is 6 months from the date of the discriminatory activity to file a discrimination charge with the EEOC in order to preserve your rights. So make sure that you don't wait too long, because after 6 months, you no longer have that right to file the case. When you look at the prevalence of sexual harassment at work, it's estimated it can go from anywhere from 25% of women to 85% of women. So as you can see, there's a huge range here of women that have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. And it doesn't just have to occur in the workplace. More than half of female students have been subjected to inappropriate sexual comments and jokes, and 35% have experienced physical harassment. And out of these, only less than 10% have reported the incident. So it does happen at school as well. If you are sexually harassed or you have witnessed harassment, again, let the offender know that the behavior is unwanted and inappropriate. And if it continues, inform appropriate authority figures. That could be the dean of, if it's an instructor, it could be a supervisor, HR, really anyone at school. If it's another student that's harassing you, you can go to any dean, would be more than happy to help you. And let other people know about the behavior. You can gain social support. More likely than not, you will not be the only victim. This concludes our PowerPoint for this week. Have a wonderful week.